hopefully two saints coming to speak about politics of incarceration soon. And Kai Parker is going to be speaking about, maybe you could mention what he's going to be speaking about.
Yeah, it's about the construction of class and geographically in the South Side, and specifically his research into black storefront churches and the role that they had ideologically for symbolizing black radical arts in the mid-century, in the 20th century.
So in the process of thinking about the radical history of Chicago, the prospect came up of inviting one of the greatest radical historians to come speak to us about his new book, Peter Linebaugh. Is it Linebaugh or Linebaugh?
I answer to most anything along those lines.
I said, I don't know, British. They say Linebaugh. They're American.
They can say what they like, but my brother, I called him Linebaugh. Yeah, rhymes with awe, or Rush Limbaugh.
No.
But it's Linebaugh.
Linebaugh. Peter Linebaugh has been so kind as to come out and speak to us today about his new book, Reverend Globe Burning. This is one of a number of great books on the history of radical movements, of radical people that Linebaugh has written, starting with The London Hanged, his first sort of book on the history of punishment, particularly capital punishment in early modern England, which is also a history of the emergence of capitalism, and I highly recommend that to anyone interested in these topics. The Many-Headed Hydra is a classic book that Peter Linebaugh and Marcus Rediker wrote together in the early 2000s, a history of piracy and of vagabonds and of revolutionaries on the high seas. More recently, the Magna Carta Manifesto, a fantastic book about the history of Magna Carta, and a book about May Day. I don't know if you have a book about May Day. And the wonderful history of May Day. The incomplete, true, authentic, and wonderful history of May Day. Some of these books are available here to buy at the back, next by the Seminary bookstore, including the new book, Red Round Globe Hot Burning, that Peter will be speaking about today. Peter just told me that he was a comrade of Edward Thompson, the great historian of Below, the history of the Below movement that Edward Thompson founded, and Peter is continuing today with this book. And with that, I will hand over to Peter to present the book and his work.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Thanks.
And thanks to Penelope Rosemont and to Paul for your hospitality, especially to Tammy and to Steve for hospitality, to the history department, and to my friends from Hither and Yon who have showed up, and new friends. It's so wonderful for me to be here among fellow students, fellow seekers. What I intend to do is to make a little more introduction to why I'm interested in this book now, because I don't feel it's really, I'm still working with it. There's much in it that is not finished. And I want to find out whether it can be useful or not to what people are thinking about these days. And as I understand it, we are living in an era of planetary catastrophe. And I'm thinking that Babylon is shaking and quivering. The planetary crisis its effects are and how we as the human beings will live with it, will live in the midst of the sixth extinction, remains to be seen. It's certainly the planetary catastrophe we must approach as a social catastrophe of how society and its economy is constituted. Around the world, there are people who are trying to subsist and to find a way of living without the state, without the corporations, without, quote, the economy, or in relationship to state, economy, and corporation, but in an autonomous relation that for several years has gone under the name of the commons, or commoning, to produce commons by our activity. But whether we see this as an aspect of nationalization of the means of production, whether we see it as public ownership, or as public goods, like our pools, our parks, our libraries, or whether we are developing a new notion again of the common good. These are, just so happens, 3 issues that all begin with the letter C: the climate, the Constitution, and the commons. And we historians, by our habit of mind, tend to see things in their origin, or we look to the genesis of a phenomenon, whether it's sexism or racism or law. The historian tends to approach things because we love dates. To try to see our relationship of our lives to the past. And it's for that reason that I wrote this book, A Red Round Globe Hot Burning. They told me that night and day was all that I could see. They told me I had 5 senses to enclose my infinite brain into a narrow circle. And they sank my heart into the abyss, a red, round globe, hot and burning, till all from life I was obliterated and erased. These are lines from William Blake, the prophet of the 1790s, the prophet and the poet. They come from a long poem of his called Visions of the Daughters of Albion, which is an allegory of human freedom in response to the Haitian Revolution that had begun 2 years earlier in 1791 in August. So there, well, the title needs more of an explanation than that. So that it has the subtitle. It's a tale at the crossroads of commons and closure, of love and terror, of race and class, and of Kate and Ned Despard. So here is a love story. And through this love story, I intend to examine the genesis of the 3 C's that I mentioned to start with, that the people around the world are thinking about now. But to do this, I'm going to try to do a little performance for you. But first, I must ask your permission for something on a personal and sensitive level. I intend to excuse me a minute. There's a reality to our subject, which is a noose, which I intend to display here just for a little while. But if this is if this triggers any any really serious emotional difficulty for anyone, I'll be glad to not do it. Do I have your permission just to put this up for a while? Yes. So, I'll try to do that. Colonel Edward Marcus Despard, Jonathan, would you do me a favor, please? And Nora, would you please come up here and just give some of these to Nora on that side of the table. Give one to everybody. It's something to take home. Is there enough? You need more?
No.
You have enough? Yeah, you have one?
Yes.
Want another? Okay. I'll explain the picture, but I'm there on the. There's 7 people about to be hanged on the 21st of February, 1803. The one on the left of the 7 is Colonel Edward Marcus Despard. And I intend and would like to recite, to perform his final speech. But I'm not sure I'll be able to memorize it. Fellow citizens, I come here, as you see, having served my country honorably, faithfully, and usefully, served it for 30 years and upwards, to hang here upon a scaffold for a crime of which I protest I am not guilty. I solemnly declare that I'm no more guilty of it than any of you who may be now hearing me. But although His Majesty's ministers know as well as I that I'm not guilty, they avail themselves of a legal pretext to destroy a man because he's been a friend to truth, to liberty, and to justice. Because he's been a friend to the poor and the oppressed. But citizens, I hope and trust that notwithstanding my fate, or the fate of the many who no doubt will soon follow me, that the principles of freedom, of humanity, and of justice will finally triumph over falsehood, tyranny, and delusion, and every principle hostile to the human race. I have little more to add except to wish you all health, happiness, and freedom, which I have endeavored, as far as was in my power, to procure for you and for mankind in general. I'd like to say at that point he was launched into eternity, but he was not. He was hanged. He was also decapitated, and that's why I took off my hood. And all the people who were watching, and you can see it, the evidence is before our eyes. At that point, they took off their hats. There were 20,000 of them. This is in London, Southwark, in 1803. And I'd like to draw your attention to this picture a little further. And the questions which we historians from below will ask of ourselves is who whom? I think John Clegg had mentioned that I had worked with Edward Thompson, whom the London Times said was more responsible for ending the Gulf War than anyone else. That's what they said in his obituary. Edward's principle of social history and of history generally was whom. That is, conflict and struggle is at the essence of historical change. This is what he was trying to teach. And so with every issue we approached, it would always be whom. Who were the Majesty's ministers? Who was being hanged? What was their names? Why were they being hanged? Who was doing it? Do you follow me? Whom? So this is in the, okay. And the people who are being hanged, this are John Francis as a shoemaker, John Wood as a laborer and a soldier, James Sedgwick Warren is a Flemish shoemaker, Thomas Broughton is a carpenter, Arthur Graham was a Westminster slater, and John McNamara was an Irishman. They were all family men, and several of them were old for their time. We would say middle age, but to be 53 in 1803 was old. They were hanged for treason. This is why their punishments were so butcher-like. So those are the people to be hanged. A guide, though, you heard Despard speak. He didn't say he said he'd faithfully served his country. He didn't say he was a traitor. He had served his country, and we don't know what country he's referring to. Is it to Ireland? And the Irish Revolt that has been suppressed 3 years earlier in 1798, and would be continued the following year with Robert Emmet, who us Americans know his name because of his brother Thomas Emmet, who was the Attorney General of New York. But I won't go down these different rabbit holes that I love so much, and then to try to knit them back together again. Or was his country England? And what was England at that time? Well, England had vanished, hadn't it? Become the United Kingdom just 2 years earlier, in 1801, with the destruction of Ireland. The Irish Parliament was destroyed. That's the beginning of the United Kingdom. You see, that gets us back to the Constitution, doesn't it? Well, it does. Like when the discussion last week or the week before was with the Prime Minister of England, was he being unconstitutional in proroguing Parliament? And many people in England are trying to rethink what is governance? What is their constitution? It's come up again. It's on the historical table again. Or was his country an empire? And what did he want to do with it? He had served that country. He was a renegade from the English ruling class. Born in Ireland in 1751. He served in Jamaica. He served in Nicaragua. He served in Honduras, or what's now Belize. And then he returned to London. And he returned at the time of the Haitian Revolt. He returned at the time of the largest slave revolt in human history, which was not just of slaves, but the revolt of the Caribbean was also among sailors, and it had profound and global reverberations via the Francophone world through the French Revolution, which also had been forced to abolish slavery. In England, there are vast changes, technological, the transition to the factory system from handicrafts, and several of these people who are to be hanged suffer from that transition, or have been thrown off their land and dispossessed because of the Enclosure Acts. In 1803, there was a General Enclosure Act passed, the first, and the most Enclosure Acts ever passed in all of British history happened in that year. Also in that year, while I'm at it, let me say that more slave ships embarked from British ports than ever before in human history. So these two facts of the dispossession of land in England, the dispossession of people from their homes in Africa for the Caribbean and for North America, is the background to the events that are happening in England at a time of revolution in Haiti, in France, and English workers are not unaware of it, but are deeply targeted. At the very moment that what we know as the English working class was being formed. It could not take the shape of trade unions because they were outlawed by the bosses of factories and by the owners of the land. Parliament was a den of thieves. The Enclosure Act was nothing but an act by a gang of banditti, says Thomas Paine, and says that same John Edward Thompson. And so say anyone who's investigated it. But usually we don't refer to parliamentarians as thieves or as a den of thieves. But the conspirators with Despard did. They